The morning at Lake Pinovi was always calm, soft wind, slow water waves, birds singing in the tall trees, and on the east side of the lake there was a small wooden cabin that everyone knew, but very few people ever entered. It belonged to a quiet black man named David Hill. David was not a loud person. He was not the type to argue, shout, or make drama. He liked peace. He liked silence. He liked to sit near the lake with a cup of coffee and think about his life. Most weekends he drove from the city to this old cabin that once belonged to his grandfather. For him, this cabin was not just wood and nails. It was memory, love, and family history. But the people around him, especially the Homeowners Association, the HOA, did not understand this. Every time David came to the cabin, the HOA members watched him from a distance. They talked to each other in low voices. They complained that he did not join community events or attend meetings. They said he was too quiet, too private, too different. David never answered them. He only waved politely and went inside his cabin. Inside the cabin were photographs of his grandfather fishing on the lake. There were old tools, hand-carved chairs, and books that smelled like old wood. David promised himself he would protect this place no matter what, but trouble was already waiting for him. One sunny afternoon, David found a letter taped to his door. It was from the HOA. In big red letters it said, "Final warning, you owe 3 years of unpaid fees." David stared at the paper for a long moment. He felt confused. He had always paid on time. In fact, he had receipts. He kept them safely in a small folder. So why were they saying he owed money? He walked to the HOA office to clear the misunderstanding. When he entered, the room went silent. 3 members looked up with cold expressions. David spoke calmly. "There must be a mistake. I have paid everything." The HOA president, a short man with a sharp look, gave a fake smile. Yes, David, but our records say you owe." "I have receipts," David replied softly. The president leaned forward. "Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Bring them next time." David walked out of the office with a strange feeling. Something was wrong. Their faces told him they were hiding something. But he didn't want to fight. He wanted peace. So he returned home, took out his folder, and placed all receipts together. Everything was clear. Everything was paid. He thought this would solve the problem, but more letters came every week. A new warning was taped to his door. The amount kept increasing. The tone became more aggressive. And neighbors started whispering, "He never pays. He is careless. He doesn't follow rules." None of them knew the truth. One evening, as the sun set behind the lake, David sat alone on the porch of his cabin. The water reflected orange and gold, but his heart felt heavy. This place was supposed to be his safe space. His grandfather's legacy. Now it felt like someone wanted to take it away from him. He took out his phone and typed a message to his brother, a federal agent. "HOA is causing problems again. They say I owe money." His brother replied, "Ignore them for now. If they try something illegal, tell me immediately." But David didn't want to involve his family. He didn't want trouble. He believed the HOA would stop eventually. He was wrong. The next day, David arrived at the cabin and froze. Another letter, but this one was worse. It said, "If you do not pay, the HOA will take action. Property may be removed." Removed? Destroyed? How could they say that? David looked at the cabin in his family's home, the place he loved. A cold fear ran through him. He had no idea that everything was about to get much worse. And the HOA had already started planning something he could not imagine. The next week at Lake Pinovi felt different. The air felt heavier. The water looked darker. Even the birds sounded quieter. David could not explain it, but he felt something wrong moving around the lake like a silent shadow. He parked his car near the cabin and saw 2 HOA members standing outside, whispering. When they noticed him, they stopped talking and walked away fast, pretending they were busy. Their behavior made him uneasy. Inside the cabin, David placed his keys on the table and let out a deep breath. He hoped the HOA would stop their nonsense. He hoped they would finally review his receipts and end the problem. But as he stepped outside to get firewood, he found another paper nailed to his cabin wall. HOA notice. Immediate payment required. Failure to pay will result in property action. This time the letters were bigger, angrier. It felt like a threat. David folded the paper carefully, keeping his calm. He didn't want to show fear. He walked back inside, placed the notice next to the others, and stared at them all in silence. The messages kept coming, and the words grew harsher every day. Something was clearly wrong. Later that afternoon, he went to the HOA office again. The same president sat behind the desk. He did not smile this time. He only narrowed his eyes. David spoke softly. "I brought my receipts." The president didn't even look at them. "We don't accept those anymore," he said coldly. "What do you mean?" David asked, confused. "We have new rules. Old receipts are not valid. Our system changed." David knew this was a lie. No official rule changes had been announced. Emails. No letters. Nothing. He looked around the room, noticing two other members smirking. Something smelled like corruption. The president leaned back. "If you want to keep your cabin, then you must pay what we say simple." "But I don't owe anything," David replied, still calm. The president shrugged. "Then you will lose your property. Maybe you should think about selling instead." David froze for a moment. Selling? Why would they want him to sell? Why were they pushing him this hard? He asked carefully, "Why are you doing this?" The president's smile returned, but this time it was cold. "Let's call it community improvement." David understood exactly what that meant. They wanted his land. Someone had plans for this lakefront space, and they were trying to push him out by force. He left the office with slow steps, feeling walls closing around him. Neighbors watched him from their windows. Some looked sorry, some looked nervous, and a few looked satisfied. But no one came out to talk to him. The next morning, things got worse. David found a large yellow sign placed near his cabin. Property under review. Owner non-compliant. Now anyone who walked by would assume he was a rule breaker or a troublemaker. The HOA wanted to ruin his reputation first, then take his property. He took a picture of the sign and sent it to his sister. It's the second federal agent in his family. She replied fast, "This looks illegal. Do not sign anything. Do not pay anything. Save every paper." But again, David didn't want to involve them. He just wanted peace, a quiet life, a simple weekend by the lake. His mistake was believing the HOA would stop that evening. As he sat on the porch, he noticed a white pickup truck slow down near his cabin. Two HOA members sat inside. They stared at him without blinking, then drove away. It felt like a warning. The sun went down. The lake turned black. David sat there in the dark, listening to the crickets. Feeling the pressure growing around him, he did not know the HOA president had already created a plan. A plan that involved false documents, false reports, and something far more dangerous. The HOA wanted his cabin gone, completely gone, and they were getting ready to take the next step, and soon. David would wake up to the biggest shock of his life. That night, David could not sleep. The sound of the lake, usually calm and soft, felt louder and more restless. The moonlight touched the broken leaves outside the window, and every shadow looked like someone watching him. He kept thinking about the HOA's warnings, the lies, the fake fees, and that cold smile from the president. Something big and dangerous was happening around him, and he felt completely alone. But he was not alone. Not really. Far from Lake Pinocchio, in a different city, two people looked at their phones with concern. These two people were not ordinary. They were his siblings, Mark Hill and Serena Hill, both federal agents. They worked in different departments, different cities, and handled difficult cases. But when it came to family, they were one team. Neither the HOA nor the neighbors had any idea about this part of David's life, because David never talked about it. He didn't brag, he didn't show off, he didn't use his siblings' power for anything. He lived simply, quietly, like their grandfather taught them. But now, the silence was becoming dangerous. Serena called David early the next morning. Her voice was sharp serious, very different from the calm tone she usually had. "David, this is not normal," she said. "These HOA letters, they look illegal. You need to tell us everything." David sighed. He looked outside at the quiet lake before replying. "I don't want to drag you and Mark into this. I can handle it." Serena didn't let him finish. "No, you clearly cannot. They want something from you. This is more than unpaid fees." David stayed silent. Deep inside, he knew she was right. The HOA didn't want money, they wanted the land. The cabin sat on one of the best lakefront spots. Developers had been trying for years to buy property around the lake. Some owners sold for small amounts. But not David. Not his family, Serena continued, her voice softening. "Grandpa built that cabin. You know, he wouldn't want you to face this alone." David felt his chest tighten. His grandfather had always said family protects family, but David didn't want to start a war. He only wanted peace. "Just give me some time," he whispered. "I will try to fix it." Serena closed her eyes for a moment. "All right. But if anything strange happens, call me immediately." She hung up, but he knew she would not let this go. Meanwhile, Mark had already started digging. He sat in his office with his laptop open and stacks of documents beside him. He was the quiet type, even quieter than David, but when he worked like fire. He searched the HOA's name, their leaders, previous complaints. And very quickly, he found something interesting. This HOA had a long list of suspicious actions. Forced property sales, fake fines, emergency meetings with no notice. Several owners had reported harassment, but their cases disappeared. Mark leaned back in his chair and whispered, "They've done this before." He sent the information to Serena with one message. "They're targeting him on purpose." Back at the lake, David spent the day repairing small things around the cabin. Fixing doors, polishing old frames. Trying to feel normal again. But his hands were shaking, and every time a car passed the cabin, he looked up fast, afraid it was someone from the HOA. By afternoon, he received a new email. It said, "Final action notice. Your property will be reviewed by external contractors. You may not be present during this process." He read the line again. May not be present? What were they planning to do when he wasn't there? His heart dropped. He called Mark. For the first time, his voice cracked. "Mark, I think something bad is about to happen." Mark's reply was immediate. "Stay calm. I'm coming tomorrow." David closed his eyes. The lake was peaceful, but his world was spinning. The HOA had crossed a line. And now his siblings were stepping in, and when federal agents step in, things change fast. But David still didn't know how far the HOA planned to go. He didn't know they were already preparing heavy machines. He didn't know they had already arranged a demolition crew. He didn't know the cabin's fate was just days away. And the HOA believed he was alone. They had no idea that his family was far more powerful than they ever imagined. The day everything changed began like any other at Lake Pinayview. The morning fog rose slowly from the water. The trees stood silent, heavy with dew. From far away, nothing looked unusual. But behind that quiet beauty, something dark was unfolding. David woke up early, planning to meet Mark, who was driving to the lake that afternoon. He made coffee, stepped outside, and looked at the soft water. For a moment, he felt calm, almost peaceful. But that peace did not last. At 9 a.m., David received a sudden call from work. They needed him urgently in the city. A sick coworker. A shift change. Something unexpected. He didn't want to leave the cabin, especially now, but he had no choice. He locked the door carefully and drove away. Thinking he'd return by evening, what he did not know was this. The HOA president watched him drive away. And the moment David's car disappeared, the president made a call. It's time. Start now. 2 hours later, the silence around the lake broke. A loud engine echoed through the forest. Birds flew away, dogs barked, and then a big yellow demolition truck rolled into the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked through windows. Some stepped out onto porches. They had heard rumors, but no one expected this. Behind the truck came another vehicle, carrying men with hard hats, safety vests, and large steel tools. None of them looked like local workers. They didn't smile. They didn't talk. They simply moved with purpose. They walked straight to David's cabin, one of the HOA. Board members placed a large red paper on the front door. Property abandoned, approved for removal. It was a lie. A complete lie. But the workers didn't care. They were paid to destroy, not to ask questions. A woman from a nearby house came running. Wait, the owner comes every week. This is wrong. The HOA president raised his hand. Stay out of it. This is official HOA action, another neighbor shouted, but he paid his fees. We've seen him. The president smirked. Then he should have brought proof. Too late now. The workers didn't stop. They began breaking windows, smashing them like they were nothing. They kicked the door in. Dust rose into the air. The sound echoed across the lake like thunder. Inside the cabin, memories were being crushed. Photographs, hand-carved chairs, the fishing rod of his grandfather, even the old wooden clock that ticked for decades. The demolition crew moved fast, too fast. It was clear they had done this before. One man started a chainsaw and cut through the front wall. Another tore the roof tiles off. Boards fell like broken bones. A lifetime of history was turning into a pile of wreckage. Some neighbors recorded the scene on their phones. Others cried, knowing how much the cabin meant to David, but fear stopped most from interfering. The HOA had a strong reputation, and not in a good way. While all this happened, the HOA president stood proudly with crossed arms. One less problem, he whispered. Meanwhile, in the city, David finished his work shift early. He checked his phone and saw missed calls from neighbors. 3, 4, 5 calls. He opened the first message. David, come fast. Something is happening at your cabin. His heart dropped. He didn't wait. He ran to his car and sped toward the lake. Every minute felt like an hour. His chest tightened. His hands shook. His mind raced with fear. What did they do? What did they do? He reached Lake Pinayview 40 minutes later. When he turned into the road leading to his cabin, he saw dust rising. People gathered. Phones out. Police sirens in the distance. And then he saw it. The cabin, his grandfather's cabin, was gone. Only broken wood, shattered glass, and dust remained. The land looked like it had been attacked by a storm. The porch was destroyed. The walls were torn apart. Even the old chimney lay on the ground like a fallen tree. David stepped out of his car slowly. His legs almost gave up. His breath caught in his chest. He walked toward the wreckage in silence as neighbors watched with sadness. He bent down and picked up a broken picture frame. Inside it was his grandfather's face, cracked with dust and glass. David didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just stood there. Empty dot behind him, the HOA president whispered to a board member, "It's done." Well, they didn't know something important. David wasn't alone anymore. Mark was already on his way. Serena would arrive by morning. And the people they were dealing with were federal agents. The HOA had just declared war on the wrong family. David stood in the ruins of his cabin long after the machines were gone. The dust had settled, but the shock had not. His hands were still trembling as he picked up broken pieces of wood, bits of glass, and torn photographs. It felt unreal. Like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. A neighbor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "David, I am so sorry. We tried to stop them."
I knew.
David nodded slowly. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "It's okay," he said. But nothing was okay. He walked toward the fallen chimney and sat on one of the broken stones. He stared at the lake that once felt like home. Now it felt cold, empty, and betrayed. Then he heard a car engine. He turned his head and saw a dark SUV speeding toward the cabin site. It stopped suddenly, and out stepped Mark, his older brother. Mark's expression was not calm like David's. His jaw was tight. His eyes were sharp. He scanned the destruction like a trained investigator. He walked straight to David. "Who did this?" David didn't answer. He simply pointed at the pile of rubble. The yellow demolition truck was still parked nearby, the workers gathering their tools. HOA members stood in a group, pretending nothing was wrong. Mark clenched his fists. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. David finally spoke. "They said the cabin was abandoned. They said I owed fees. They destroyed everything." Mark took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. "They think you're alone," he said. "They don't know who they're messing with." 10 minutes later, another car arrived. A black sedan. Serena stepped out, calm, focused, and holding a file in her hand. She was in her work clothes, her ID badge hanging around her neck. She walked toward the destroyed cabin with slow, careful steps. Her eyes taking in every detail. When she reached David, she didn't speak at first. She simply hugged him tightly. "I'm here," she whispered. "We're both here." Mark stepped next to them. "We're going to handle this." David's voice broke. "They took Grandpa's cabin. They destroyed everything inside." Serena knelt next to the debris. She picked up the cracked wooden clock, their grandfather's favorite, and brushed the dust off gently. "This wasn't a mistake," she said. "This was an attack." She stood up and faced the HOA president, who was pretending to check papers with his team. Serena walked straight toward him. Mark followed. The president looked uncomfortable, but tried to keep his fake confidence. "Can I help you?" Serena showed her badge slowly. "Yes." "You can start by explaining who gave you permission to demolish an occupied property." The president's confidence vanished instantly. His eyes widened. "Occupied?" "No, we had a notice. It was abandoned." "The system," Mark stepped forward. "Stop lying." The president swallowed hard. "We followed procedure." Serena held up the demolition papers she found pinned at the cabin earlier. "These documents are fake. The signatures don't match. The dates are wrong. And legally," she paused, stepping closer, "you cannot demolish private property without a court order." The HOA board members stepped back. Sweat appeared on their faces. The workers watched silently from the side. Serena continued, her voice steady. "You destroyed a home. You destroyed family belongings. This is property damage, fraud, and harassment," Mark added. "And we haven't even started asking about the false fees." The president opened his mouth, but no words came out. Neighbors slowly gathered around, whispering. Some recorded, some nodded. For the first time, people were seeing the truth. The HOA wasn't just strict. They were corrupt. Serena took pictures of the entire site. Mark interviewed neighbors, gathering witness statements. David watched them move like trained professionals. He didn't want to involve them, but now he felt a strange comfort. He wasn't alone anymore. His family was fighting for him. As evening came, Serena closed her notebook. "We have enough evidence to open a federal investigation." Mark looked at the trembling HOA president. "You destroyed the wrong house. You messed with the wrong man. And now you'll face the law." The president stepped back, pale and shaking. David stood beside his siblings, feeling stronger than he had in weeks. The HOA thought they had one, but the real battle was just beginning. The Hill family was awake now. They were not backing down. The sun was setting over Lake Pineview, painting the water in soft orange and gold, but the beauty could not hide what had happened here. David stood quietly beside the remains of his cabin, while Mark and Serena finished gathering the last pieces of evidence. The ruins no longer felt like a place of sadness. Now they felt like the beginning of justice. Serena looked at David. "We're ready," she said. "Tomorrow, we take everything to the federal office." David nodded, still feeling the weight of the day. "I never wanted it to reach this point," he said softly. Mark placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't choose this. They forced it, and now they'll answer for it." The next morning, the HOA president arrived at the office as usual, expecting another quiet day. But when he walked into the parking lot, 3 black government cars were already waiting. Federal officers stepped out, and behind them were Mark and Serena. The president froze. "What? What's going on?" Serena held up a document. You are under investigation for fraud, destruction of private property, intimidation, falsifying documents, and misuse of HOA authority. The president's face drained of all color.
Wait.
We followed the rules. Mark stepped forward. You didn't follow anything. You created fake fees. You forced owners to sell. And you destroyed a cabin you had no legal right to touch. Several neighbors gathered around, watching, whispering, recording. The truth was spreading. The president tried one last excuse. The owner never responded. He ignored warnings. Mark pointed at the stack of receipts, pictures, and witness statements in his hand. He responded every year with payments. You hid them. The officers approached. The president stepped back. This is a misunderstanding. Serena shook her head. No, this is a crime. Within minutes, the president and 2 board members were escorted into the federal cars. Their faces were pale, their hands shaking. The community stood in shock. Some smiled quietly, knowing justice had finally come. That afternoon, David visited the federal office with his siblings. A long meeting took place. Lawyers, investigators, community officials, everyone listened as David explained the truth. Serena presented every piece of evidence. Mark backed it with witness reports. The officials nodded, their expressions serious. One investigator finally said, "This case is strong. The HOA will face heavy penalties." Another added, "And we will require them to rebuild the destroyed cabin at full cost." David exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. But the investigator wasn't done. Because this was an intentional attack, you will also receive financial compensation for emotional and material damage. Mark leaned closer to David and whispered, "Told you. They messed with the wrong family." Weeks passed. Construction trucks arrived at Lake Pinayview, but this time not for destruction. This time, they came with respect. Contractors rebuilt the cabin from the ground up. They followed David's instructions carefully. They even used old materials from the ruins to keep the cabin's heart alive. Neighbors often came by to help. They brought food, shared memories, and apologized for not speaking earlier. The community felt lighter, freer. Many admitted they had feared the HOA for a long time. One evening, while workers hammered new boards into place, an old neighbor said quietly, "Your siblings did what no one here had the courage to do." David looked toward the lake. "They did what family must do," he replied. Months later, the cabin was complete. It stood taller than before, stronger, warmer. A perfect mix of old and new. David placed his grandfather's restored photo on the porch wall and smiled for the first time in a long while. That day, Mark and Serena visited. The 3 stood outside under the evening sky. Watching the lake reflect soft blue colors, Serena spoke with a gentle smile. Grandpa would be proud. You protected his home. David looked at his siblings. No, we protected it. Mark nodded. And if anyone tries something again, they'll meet us first. They all laughed, the first real laugh since everything began. As night fell, David sat on the porch, listening to the calm lake. The world felt peaceful again, safe again, strong again. A voiceover could end the story like this. Sometimes the quietest person carries the loudest truth. And sometimes the wrong people learn the hard way. That family is the strongest force on earth. The camera slowly fades out on the rebuilt cabin, glowing warm under the sunset, a symbol of justice, strength, and the power of standing together.